Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'll be reacting to another Chill and Scares video for you guys. And this one is called 5 Disturbing Recordings Left by Missing Persons. I'm going to turn the lights off again, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this action on the road and in the bag. Alrighty, here we go.
On July 29, 2008, a mother of two named Susan Powell recorded a video where she documented the assets in her home in Utah, just in case, in her own words, something happened to her.
This is me, July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33 Mountain Time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible.
The video was made on her attorney's advice, who feared that Susan's husband Josh might attempt to sell some of her most expensive assets. In the years leading up to the now infamous video's recording, the couple's marriage had been under a lot of strain, and during the recording, Susan lets on that things had been everything but peaceful between her and Josh over the past few years.
This is all stuff bought in a year or less through Home Depot on my credit. Josh bought a lot of stuff and then he had to bankrupt it. And then he bought a little bit more on my credit. There's a nice lamp. These are
So it sounds like her husband was not keeping up with paying like bills and stuff, and then he ends up getting the bankrupt stuff, and nobody won't give him a loan. So he had to use her credit to get stuff. But if it's on her credit card or anything, then she has every right to sell it, or not him. I can see why their marriage is starting to fall apart.
Things to roll wood with. And I had necklaces too. All of those are got in a rage, as you can see, and broke this. There's duds and pearls and opals in there. Broke this and threw all my DVDs and made a mess. Because he was angry at me about a year or two back.
Although Susan had been seeing a divorce attorney to look into the possibility of leaving her husband, they were still living together in 2009, almost a year and a half after the video was recorded. On the morning of December 6th of that year, Susan went to church with her two boys, after which a neighbor went to visit her, leaving her house at about 5 p.m. That night, Josh allegedly took the couple's two boys, Charlie and Braden Powell, on a camping trip in the middle of the night in blizzard conditions to a campsite on the Pony Express Trail. According to Josh, Susan stayed home because she was tired. The story goes that the next day, Susan's family and friends reported her missing when her two boys weren't dropped off at daycare. When Josh came back from the supposed camping trip with his sons, he said that when he had left the previous evening, his wife had been sleeping peacefully at home and that he had no idea what could have happened to her. After searching the couple's house in Utah, police found no signs of foul play, but things continued to get stranger as the investigation continued. Inside Susan's safe deposit box at the bank where she worked, the cops found a handwritten will and testament in which Susan alleged that Josh had taken out a $1 million life insurance policy on her a few weeks prior.
Uh-oh.
Disturbingly, she also wrote, "If I die, it may not be an accident." About 10 days after she mysteriously disappeared, the authorities also found that Josh had filed paperwork to withdraw money from a retirement account, and he was officially declared a person of interest in the case. Suspiciously, Susan's family and friends reported that during the search efforts, Josh never seemed to show a genuine interest in finding his wife. But despite the mountain of evidence stacked against him, Josh Powell was never formally charged in his wife's disappearance.
What? Hold on. Hold on. No. If he's not helping to try to find her, that would give me a motive right there to, charge him. 2, you're taking out not only her life insurance policy, but withdraw money from her retirement plan, which I didn't know you can do. But anyway, that will give me another suspicion right there. But yeah, he's guilty.
During the investigation, the cops questioned the couple's two sons, but it was hard to get any solid information out of them on account of their age. Even though they mentioned that Josh had taken Susan with them on their camping trip on the night of the disappearance, they also made outlandish claims, including allegations that they had arrived at the campsite by airplane. This made it impossible to use their statements as evidence that Josh was responsible for his wife's disappearance. Shortly after, Josh and his two sons moved back to their home state of Washington, but the authorities soon determined it wasn't safe for Braden and Charlie to be living with their father in the middle of the investigation, and Josh lost custody of the boys. This is where things get extremely disturbing. On February 5th, 2012, more than 2 years after Susan's disappearance, a state caseworker brought the two boys to Josh's house for what was supposed to be a supervised visit. Immediately upon their arrival, Josh locked the social worker out of the house and took the lives of both his children and himself by setting the house on fire with gasoline. If his behavior during the initial phases of the investigation was suspicious, the unspeakable crimes Josh committed on that day in 2012 were about as clear of an admission of guilt as you can get in a case like this. In the aftermath of the tragic incident, the cops started looking into Josh's brother and father, who they suspected knew more about the case than they were letting on. Even though they had solid evidence to suggest Michael, Josh's brother, had helped him conceal Susan's body, the case reached a dead end when Michael also took his own life in 2013. More than a decade later, Susan's dad won a lawsuit against Washington State for nearly $100 million on grounds of negligence and failure to protect the two children who were supposed to be in the state's custody, a big chunk of which he gave to a charity to support domestic violence survivors. Almost 15 years after her disappearance and murder of her two children, people still gather in Susan's hometown of Puyallup, Washington every year to pay their respects and honor her memory. The last video Susan made documenting her assets received a lot more attention after everything had happened. With hindsight, the video is portrayed in a much more disturbing light. Susan saying things like, "I'm recording this just in case anything happens," makes you wonder if she knew her husband could do something this horrible as she was filming. Over the years, Susan's father has been alerted of possible locations where his daughter's remains might be buried, including abandoned mines in Utah and other isolated locations. Sadly, every lead has turned out to be a false alarm, and it's very unlikely that Susan's remains will ever be found.
This case right here already reminds me of that other guy that killed his wife and daughters in Colorado, that Christopher Watts guy. If that social worker should have brought a cop with her or two to see the transaction between, her bringing his kids to him and not locking the door up and burning the whole house down with them in it. I said, it won't nothing to do with the kids. I said, you could have just spared your boys and let them live lives of their own. But I don't know what goes on with these parents that end up killing their families. It just, I get so frustrated with these cases right here. But anyway, before I blow a gasket, I also like to say that I'm glad that the woman's father won a lawsuit against the state. Yeah, because the state of Washington, because they should have made better preparations with the social worker to make sure that not only them boys stayed safe, but after all these years, you still can't find her. Oh yeah, this video was posted about a month ago, so I don't know when this case was. If you guys know anything about this case about Susan Powell, let me know. I don't know when this case was on the news or anything, but I just feel sad for them boys. Or any other kid that their lives were ended so shortly. They never got to experience life like we do. Woo. Anyway, let's go to the second story.
Amber Tukar was a 20-year-old Canadian First Nations woman from Fort McMurray, Alberta. In August of 2012, she flew from Alberta to Edmonton International Airport and booked a hotel room with her 1-year-old son and a female friend for a short vacation. That night, she got excited about the trip and decided to hitchhike into the city by herself, after which she was never seen again. When Amber didn't return to the hotel the next day, her friend called her mother, who immediately called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Soon after, Amber was declared a missing person. The authorities dug into her phone records and found that she had received a phone call while she was in the company of an unidentified man. The recording is pretty unsettling, especially since it marked the last time she was ever heard alive.
Where are we by? We're just heading south of Beaumont, or north of Beaumont. We're heading north of Beaumont. Yo, where are we going? No, this is a... Are you kidding me? You better not take me anywhere I don't want to go. I want to go into the city. Kidding. Yo, we're not going into the city, are we? No, we're not. Yeah. So where these roads going to? 50th Street. 50th Street. Are you sure? Absolutely. Yo, where are we going? 50th Street. 50th Street. 50th Street. East, right? East. Over town. Valley.
In the recording, a male driver can be heard reassuring Amber that they're heading where she wants to go.
No.
She doesn't seem to be buying the story and is obviously pretty...
I wouldn't be buying it either, but that guy probably got fed up with her questions and probably killed her. Right then and there. So, this is why I don't trust getting picked up by people. Anyway, let's continue.
distressed. On August 28th, the cops released the phone conversation, but they didn't officially start investigating the disappearance until well after a month after Amber was reported missing. Sadly, when Amber's mother pressured the cops to do something and help her find her daughter, they dismissed her and told her that Amber was probably just out partying and would turn up soon. Tragically, on September 1st, 2012, just 4 days after the audio from the eerie conversation was released, the remains of Amber's body were found on a rural property near Leduc County by a group of horseback riders. One of the most frustrating aspects of this case is how unprofessionally the disappearance was handled by the Canadian police. After just 1 month of searching, Amber was taken off missing persons list based on a series of suspicious, unconfirmed, and anonymous sightings in Edmonton, and it took her mother an entire month to get her back on the list. By the time she was put back on the list by the negligent cops who made the unforgivable mistake, her property, which could have been used as evidence, had already been accidentally destroyed after it was recovered from her hotel. Over the years, a few women have come forward claiming to know the identity of the man in the recording, with all of them accusing the same man. The authorities say they've looked into him, but he wasn't declared a person of interest. A few years ago, another man came forward and claimed that the man in the recording was his father, an American citizen with no legal standing in Canada who had been living on a ranch in the greater Edmonton area. If the man's testimony is to be believed, his father is also responsible for several other mysterious disappearances and deaths that have taken place in the area over the last few years. One of the most disturbing aspects in the recording is the audible dishonesty in the man's voice, which is pretty much clear as day when Amber asks if he's sure they're going into the city, and he responds with an extremely fake "absolutely." It's also pretty messed up how the cops handled the case from start to finish, and many people suspect the cause of the unprofessional management of the case was just straight up racism against the Indigenous woman. Hopefully, we'll someday have an explanation for what happened that night to Amber Tukar, but for now the case remains a pretty disturbing mystery.
Okay, I am more furious on this one too. First of all, daggum Canadian police don't want to do their job and find her, but then when they do, they go like, "Oh crap, we should have did our job." Yeah, you should have. Now she's dead. And two, her stuff accidentally being destroyed. I'm like, why? What are the chances of that, right? And three, why has anybody not found evidence against the person they were talking about taking her? This is just... Yeah, and they're also acting like they didn't care about this Indigenous woman. It's kind of like some of the cops over here in the States that don't care about people, like the ones that do it for the money. Ooh. For me, it's kind of like a hard pill to swallow. I mean, good lordy. You're supposed to trust the cops and ask them for help, and then they act like this. Ooh. I don't know what's going on in this world anymore. It's starting to become a mess.
In late 2014, a YouTuber named Kenny Veach commented under the username SnakeBitMcGee on a video titled Area 51 Technician's Son Discloses Secret Alternative Energy. The comment read, "That ain't nothing. I am a long-distance hiker. One time during one of my hikes out by Nellis Air Force Base, I found a hidden cave. The entrance to the cave was shaped like a perfect capital M. I always enter every cave I find, but as I began to enter this particular cave, my whole body began to vibrate. The closer I got to the cave entrance, the worse the vibrating became. Suddenly, I became very scared and hightailed it out of there. That was one of the strangest things that ever happened to me." As you can imagine, Kenny's comment immediately caught a lot of people's attention. Some people called Kenny a liar, while others encouraged him to find the cave again and record his findings. And so he agreed to do just that. On October 18th of that year, Kenny uploaded a video of his long-distance hike in the Nevada desert in which he attempted to find the cave for a second time.
Well, here I am on my hike up here in the mountains north of Las Vegas. This is a canyon I just walked up in. And you can't tell.
I think I heard about this in the other Chillin' Scares video where it was talking about caves or whatnot. I think it was that video, but anyway, he was exploring the cave or whatever, and he never got found.
But my truck is way out there by the mountains at the very, very end of this valley.
At the beginning of the video, Kenny stands at the top of an abandoned mine shaft and gives his viewers an introduction into the monstrous hike that lies ahead of him that day. As the day goes on, he continues to record what he sees as he travels through the Mojave Desert trying to locate the cave again.
There's some interesting stuff coming up here. See those? Look at that. Kind of right there. That's kind of cool. All right, I'm going to turn it off, and then I'll turn it back on here. Look at that. That's pretty cool right there. Huh. All right, off with the camera.
That was the end of the video Kenny posted. Because he failed to find the cave the second time through, a lot of his viewers criticized him pretty brutally, calling him a fraud and pressuring him into trying to find the cave for a third time. In a sea of comments provoking Kenny, a user named Lemmy Killmister made a particularly disturbing and ominous comment that read, "No, do not go back there. If you find that cave entrance, don't go in. You won't get out." Still, on November 10th of that year, Kenny told his family he was going on an overnight hiking trip, and he set off by himself for the third time to find the mysterious M Cave in the Mojave Desert, one of the hottest and driest regions in the world. That was the last time he was ever seen. On November 22nd, 2014, 12 days after he set off on his search for the M Cave, a group of search and rescue volunteers found Kenny's phone lying at the top of the same mine shaft he had pointed out in his M Cave video. Unfortunately, after his phone was located, the case went cold, and Kenny's body was never found. After the mysterious disappearance, people started coming up with all sorts of theories to explain what could have happened to Kenny, with most people claiming that he had either fallen down the abandoned mine shaft or died of overexposure. Some of the more outlandish theories reported that Kenny could have witnessed a crime out in the middle of the desert and had to be silenced, or that he found a secret military base and was eliminated by the government. However, a few months after his disappearance, a comment on the original video made by a woman named Sharon Pilgrim shed light on an entirely new possibility, that Kenny had taken his own life. The comment read, "I am the girlfriend that Kenny spoke of in the video. Kenny has not been found, and I feel that he probably will not be found for many, many months, if ever. I want you to know that I do not think Kenny had an accident. I believe he took his life. He battled with depression for many years and would not take medication or see a doctor. He quit his job a little more than a year before he disappeared. In response to his phone being found at the mine shaft, Sharon then added, "The mine shaft was about a 4-hour hike from his car. It is my feeling that he left it behind so that he could not be tracked from the GPS in it. He also did not take his video camera with him on this solo hike. It was left in his home, so he had no intention of filming anything. I am healing from my loss and look forward to new experiences with desert hiking, camping, and taking beautiful pictures of our desert. Enjoy your adventures of life, and thank you for the kind, loving comments sent my way." Even though the woman's comment seems pretty genuine and brings light to the very real possibility that Kenny took his own life, the case still doesn't have a solid conclusion. Over the years, several other YouTubers have found caves in the same area Kenny was hiking in that almost perfectly resembled the letter M, and recently one of them even had a danger restricted area sign put up next to his entrance. So, even though it's possible that Kenny took his own life in the desert, his disappearance has still left more questions than answers.
Now, if he did take his own life, somebody would have been able to find his body in the cave somewhere, right? And I hope they do find him, though. I'm sorry that he was going through a depressional state.
On September 8, 2015, a man named Tim from Mounds View, Minnesota contacted the police and told them his friend, 32-year-old Henry McCabe, a Liberian immigrant and auditor for the Department of Revenue, had gone missing. As per Tim's testimony, Henry had been at a barbecue hosted by a friend named Emmanuel earlier that day and had left to go to a nightclub at around 11 p.m. After following up with the two acquaintances who had been with Henry at the club on the night of the disappearance, the cops realized they had a pretty complicated case on their hands. According to the two friends who had been with Henry at the Saint Labie nightclub in Spring Lake that night, Henry had been drinking pretty heavily, and upon leaving the club at around 2 a.m., he allegedly asked William, one of the acquaintances he was with, to drop him off at a gas station nearby. After getting dropped off by William, who thought it was strange that Henry rejected his offer to drop him off at his house instead of a random gas station, Henry called his wife a little after 2:20 a.m. According to his wife, Henry sounded pretty delirious on the call, and near the end of the conversation, she called one of Henry's friends to ask him to go get her husband. Even though the friend didn't answer the call, the last 2 minutes of the conversation between Henry and his wife were recorded by the friend's voicemail, and the content of the conversation is pretty disturbing.
What?
It's almost impossible to make out any of the words in the audio, and the combination of growls, moans, and screams makes it hard to know what to even make of the recording.
Yeah, I don't even know what to make of it. I didn't know if he was being tortured by power tools or he was too drunk. He kept on making weird noises. Still baffles my mind right there.
But needless to say, the voicemail is pretty unsettling. It almost sounds like the screams are coming from someone who's being attacked, but
Yeah.
we obviously can't know for sure. That same evening, another acquaintance called Henry and later told police that it sounded as though Henry had gotten into an altercation with someone in the middle of the call. Strangely, even though Corrine McCabe, Henry's wife, mentioned that the sounds her husband was making during the call were extremely out of character for him, who was usually perfectly articulate, she only made a single call to one of Henry's friends to try and get him to pick up her husband, and when she didn't get a response, she went right back to bed. Even more strangely, during her questioning, Corrine repeatedly told the cops that she knew Henry was alive, even though she didn't have the evidence to prove it directly. After this extremely disturbing voicemail was recorded, Henry's phone records show that he called a Texas number that he had called over 20 times that day, but when the cops tried to trace the number, it came up as no longer in service. It's impossible to know if the calls themselves were made by Henry or someone else, but after the unsettling conversation with his wife, phone records show that several calls were made from Henry's phone to that same now disconnected number in the days following his disappearance. As the investigation went on, things continued to get stranger. Suspiciously, the cops never found footage of William's red car pulling up to the gas station where he had supposedly dropped Henry off, even though they checked the entire night's footage from all angles. William later ended up changing his story and alleged that as soon as he dropped Henry off, he immediately got back in the car and William dropped him off at another gas station a couple of miles away. It was later revealed by a confidential FBI informant that during the searches that took place after the disappearance, Emmanuel, the host of the barbecue, and a group of 3 other men would often stand a few feet away from the rest of the search party and talk suspiciously among themselves. Still, it was never determined if they had anything to do with the disappearance. On October 2nd, almost a month after Henry went missing, a strange anonymous letter was sent to the New Brighton Police Department a few miles from where Henry went missing. The letter read, "Henry McCabe, his body next to water, partially buried. Needs search dog to find. Witness who saw burial scared, female young. Asked to come forward. Can remain anonymous and will protect." On November 2nd, the cops found Henry's body in Rush Lake, a few miles from where Henry had supposedly been dropped off on the night of his disappearance. Mysteriously, they didn't find any signs of foul play on his body, even though the anonymous letter suggests he was buried by someone else. Despite the lack of evidence on his body, it's possible that he was either forcibly drowned by a group of assailants, that he took his own life, or that something entirely different took place that night. The only thing we know for sure is that this is an extremely strange case that we'll probably never get a conclusive explanation for.
Which I hope they do get it solved, because I just saw that picture right there and he had kids. I know they want answers too. Be like, why is their dad not here? But when I heard the audio, it didn't sound like he was getting muffled in water or anything, or he was taking his own life. But it still baffles me.
In the summer of 2013, a 26-year-old oil worker from Texas named Brandon Lawson arrived home from work and immediately got into an argument with his long-term girlfriend. Things had been pretty tense between the couple in the days leading up to that evening, as Brandon had frequently been working Monday through Sunday, and the youngest of the couple's 2 children was only a few months old. Also, Brandon had recently relapsed into addiction, which further strained their relationship. It's unclear if his girlfriend kicked him out of the house or if he decided to leave after about an hour of arguing, but whatever the case, Brandon got in his silver Ford F-150 and drove away from his home in San Angelo at midnight on August 8th, after which he was never seen again. The incredibly strange events that took place over the next few hours have turned this case into one of the most mysterious and disturbing disappearances of the decade. About half an hour after leaving his house, Brandon made a phone call to his brother Kyle, letting him know that he was a few miles south of Brunn on a stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere and that he was out of gas. After fetching a gas can from Brandon's house, which was about a mile away from his own, Kyle got into his car and prepared to drive to his brother's location. But things didn't exactly go according to plan for Brandon, and a few minutes later, at around 12:50 a.m., he made this disturbing call to 911.
911 emergency. Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. It's like we're just pushing guys over. We're out here going towards gasoline on both sides. Not sure if they're out of gas. There's one car here. You got to take it to the woods. Quick letters. Okay, now run that by me. We're not talking to them. All right, so you ran into them. Ah, you ran into them. Okay. That's the first guy. Do you need an ambulance? Yeah, no, I need a call. Okay. Is anybody hurt? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Although it's hard to make out what's going on in the background, many people have alleged that they can hear the sound of gunshots and other people talking in the audio. But
That did sound like gunshots, but I barely heard anybody else talking. And what's wrong with that 911 operator? He said, help me. She said, hello. And then he said something about where he's at and everything, but she was going like, do you need an ambulance or anything? No, just the cops.
it's hard to confirm what exactly was being said and what was even going on during the call. 8 minutes after Brandon's 911 call, another driver called the cops to inform that a silver F-150 had been parked pretty dangerously on the highway, with the back of the truck sticking out into the other lane. Following his call to 911, Brandon continued to contact his brother Kyle by phone, and they exchanged a series of strange phone calls. Even though these next calls weren't recorded, according to Kyle, Brandon sounded extremely paranoid, repeatedly claiming that he was being chased out of town by the Mexicans in the neighborhood. When Kyle asked him if he had been using drugs again, Brandon immediately denied it. At around 1:10 a.m., Kyle arrived at the location where the truck was parked, but Brandon was nowhere to be seen. A few minutes after his brother's arrival, Brandon once again called Kyle and made a series of disturbing statements, claiming that he could see Kyle and the officer that had just arrived at the scene, that he was bleeding, and that they needed to hurry. Disturbingly, he was nowhere in sight. For the next few minutes, Kyle continued to try to get in touch with Brandon, but all his calls went straight to voicemail. After failing to find him that night, the cops launched an official search for Brandon, complete with helicopters, thermal cameras, dogs, and a massive search party. Unfortunately, Brandon was nowhere to be found. It was later revealed that Brandon had cashed out his 401k on the night of his disappearance, suggesting he might have vanished on his own accord. However, due to his distressed phone calls to 911 and his brother, it's also possible that Brandon fell victim to some sort of cartel activity, or that someone he ran into on the road attacked him. In February 2022, a small search party consisting of family members and friends found a pair of shoes and clothing that matched the description of what Brandon was wearing on the night of his disappearance. And after searching the area, the cops found human remains near the location of the shoes and clothing. Even though the remains were sent to be tested more than 2 years ago, there still hasn't been a definitive answer for whether they belonged to Brandon or what could have happened to him that night. Hopefully, with time, more conclusive answers will surface to give Brandon's family a sense of much-needed closure. Until then, this will probably remain as one of the most disturbing missing persons cases from recent years.
Like he said, I hope they do find answers for this guy. But yeah, you definitely don't want to get involved in no cartel or gang member groups because they'll be coming after you with guns a-blazing. But anyway, that's going to be it for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more Chillin' Scares videos. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and have a nice day, everybody.